Missing one page of this can make you fail an audit. If you have a CDL or non-CDL driver under your authority and you don't have a compliant driver qualification file, you're already failing a DOT audit, even if you've never been pulled over for one yet. And yes, this includes owner-operators. Hey y'all, I'm the Hotshot Doc, a real-life doctor and hotshot carrier, and I'm coming to you live from North Alabama. And honestly, trucking compliance is way harder than HIPAA, but I'm here to change that. Y'all step on into my compliance clinic. Let's get started today. Today's video is focusing on what's called a driver qualification file, or what we say DQF because it takes too long to say it the other way. A DQF is federally required. It's a compliance file that proves every CDL driver operating under your authority is legally qualified to drive that vehicle. The FMCSA requires this file for company drivers, leased-on drivers, and yes, the owner-operator if you're driving your own truck. Today we're focusing on CDL holders specifically. If you are non-CDL, you want to go to my other video series. It does vary between those licenses. Alright, so we're just going to break down real quick the top 8 things you need in this DQF. The first thing you need is a driver's application for employment. We're going to circle back to this because there's some specific things you need in there. You need a copy of the motor vehicle record received from each driver's state that they've had a license in. You want to go back 3 to 5 years, make sure you're checking all of them. You want a note relating to the annual review of the driver's record from each of those states. So you got to go in, sign and date when you pulled it, and sign and date that you reviewed it and went over it with them. Because this is the CDL specific, you want a copy of their CDL in there. You want a road test certificate signed and dated, or a signed statement that the CDL was accepted in lieu of this, meaning if they have a CDL, you don't have to go out and give them a road test because they've already proven multiple times in school that they can do this and do it safely. Some larger companies will still make you go out and do a road test, especially if you're in big rigs. This is Hotshots. Just look at the person applying and make your call from there. You may do a road test for insurance purposes. A lot of people skip it with the smaller companies, especially if they've already got their CDL. You also need a medical examiner's certificate, and then what most people miss is you need to have a note relating to the verification of that medical examiner. So you've got to go to the FMCSA portal and you've got to type in the national registry number of that medical examiner and check that it was active when it was done, and then they are listed in that registry of certified medical examiners. Sign it, date it. Some people let their licenses lapse. When you hired this person, you got to be able to show that you went in and everything was current and up to date and all the good stuff. So I wanted to go back and break down that driver's application for employment. If the officer that's inspecting you is, Wile E. Coyote, or if you're getting a state audit done in that first year as a new authority, there's a couple different things that they might look for specifically, and it does get this specific in the FMCSA rules. So when you look at their signed application, you've got to include an employment history for the past 3 years. CDL applicants, whether or not they're intra or interstate, they also have to provide an additional 7 years of information. So you're looking 10 years total for a CDL holder. You also have to go back and reach out to those employers and get the history, performance, safety for that person from each of those employers. You got to document you reached out. It really doesn't matter if the employer gets back to you, but you got to write down that you tried to contact them. You got to have the driver's legal name, their residential address, their phone and email. Make sure it's a working one and that you can get in contact with them. You need obviously their license number from their CDL and which state did that. You need their social security number. This is going to be part of verifying that they are eligible to work in the United States, and we all know they're hitting that hard these days. And then you need their date of birth, which should be listed on their CDL. So real quick, we're going to circle back to what is an inquiry to previous employers. That's their safety performance history. And remember, on CDL, you got to go back 10 years. And any gaps of employment have to be documented. So even if they were at home on sick leave, or they had kids, or I don't know, they just took some time off, they've got to write down why they were not working at that time. So you've got to go back, ask all of their previous employers for the past 10 years, specifically DOT regulated employers. You got to ask about their accidents, their drug tests, their alcohol tests, any violations they had, why they got fired, why they left the company, that kind of stuff. With the CDL, many carriers rely on just the clearinghouse results alone for those drug and alcohol results. That is acceptable according to the FMCSA. But you may, while you're reaching out, because you still have to document you reached out to these people, you may go ahead and ask. You never know. It may save you some insurance stuff. All right, moving on. You've got to do background investigation records. So that's that responses from employment verifications and that you documented trying to contact their previous employers. You've got to do a request of their driving record from each state they had a license in. And what makes all this legal for you to go out, you're like, wow, this is a lot of personal information to carry on this person. It is. So you've got to make sure that you've got secure filing system, that you're using a secure database to hold all of this information on. You don't want it to get hacked into. But the Fair Credit Reporting Act, I believe it's from 1996. It's a release form. Essentially, it was a court case that says you notified the applicant that you're running all of these background checks and that you do have all this personal information on them. The FMCSA doesn't require you to have this signed, but like legally, you have to have this signed to pull this information on people. That's why you see it in all the applications. It's worked in. It's not hard. You can quite literally Google this statement and put it in that application and just have them sign it. And if they have questions, you're not pulling their credit report. That's what people think. You're pulling their background stuff, and this is what makes it legal for you to do so. So make sure you get that signed. Also, in that application, you're going to need a statement of on-duty driving hours for the past 7 days. This is going to determine how many hours the driver has the day he starts driving. We can go more into this on an hour of service regulation video. Essentially, if they work in another job or they're changing jobs, they probably just need a 36-hour reset. If they aren't working, then those past 7 days, just put 0 in all of them. Got to sign it, got to date it. You need a driver statement for other compensated work, because if they're working another job, I've got one guy that's an engineer, and he wanted to drive because he's off every 2 weeks. So he wanted to drive the 2 weeks every month that he was off. That's fine, but we've got to make sure that he's not overworking the hours. Those hours of service, it still regulates you. It still applies. So he's got to make sure he's got his breaks, his resets, and that he actually has legal driving hours that he can do for this job. And he's figured it out. We've helped him do it, and it seems to be working okay for him. You also need that federally required W-9 and other supporting documents. Well, it's actually an I-9. So when these are what the IRS requires you to check to make sure this person is legally able to work in the United States. So you've already asked for most of this information. You've got their CDL, and then you've got their social security number. Just ask to see a picture of their social security card. A passport can work. It's listed on these government documents. You can either have their passport or you can have a state-issued ID and a second form of identity, which would usually be that social security card. Make sure you make copies of it and keep these in a secure file. You're going to need it at tax time anyway to send out W-2s or 1099s, however you've got your company set up. And so this just makes sure that you are hiring people that are here in the United States legally to work. You don't want to mess with the IRS. Nobody messes with the IRS. The application is usually also recommended to contain past driving experience, any education and courses that they had relevant to the position, and any other information that you feel would be relevant to hiring this person for your company. If you're the owner of the company, which most of the people listening to this are going to be, then whatever you find is helpful to making sure you've got a good applicant in front of you. Now, before we move on from this topic, I just wanted to make sure I've covered the carrier, that person who is having the authority, the name of that company, everything that's tied there. You have to hold on to this information legally for 3 years. Some of it you have to hold on to for longer. So rule of thumb is hold on to it for 5 to 7 and maybe don't even get rid of it after that, because the state could always come back and audit you later. You've got other employers that may be calling and asking you for history. stuff like that. So make sure you've got a good filing system, a good organization system, and a safe, secure place to keep this information, because you're going to be hanging on to it for a while. Here's the other thing that owner-operators usually miss, and they miss it all the time. If you own the company and drive, you still have to complete all of this information on yourself. You got to fill out the application, you got to pull your driving records, medical verification, yada, 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 all the stuff. There's no exemptions just because you're the boss. You got to go in, you got to fill it out, and you have to sign it. Sign and date everything. Other places where carriers usually fail, they're missing their prior employer inquiries. Remember that CDL, you have to go back 10 years, and you got to document all of those attempts to reach out to those prior employers and ask about their safety history. Something else that people usually miss is they don't have a note that shows they reviewed that driving record. They'll pull the driving record, but they'll forget to sign and date that note saying they went over it with the driver and here's what they did. Something else people usually miss is that medical examiner wasn't verified. You got to have a note that went in and talked about place of business, what date you went and verified this, and were they in the FMCSA National Registry when you hired this person. Sign and date it. Something else people miss, they have forms scattered hither to yon all over the place. They'll have it scattered across different emails. You need one organized file. People get hung up on whether or not it needs to be digital or paper copy. I send my drivers with both, that way you can't lose. I'll tell you one crazy story. One of our drivers got out in Kansas one time. The wind was gusting. He's an Alabama boy. He was not used to that, and that metal folder that had everything in it slipped out behind him. Bam! Hit the ground. Papers went flying. He couldn't get it all. He was missing a bunch of things. Truck registration was one of them. And guess who was sitting down the road waiting on him? Good old DOT inspection, roadside inspection, and they got him. And that technically should have been an out of service. The cop was nice, nice enough anyway. He gave him just a fine for missing the truck registration. The driver did have the backup in his email. I don't know if he couldn't pull it out in time or if the officer preferred to have that in the actual paper form. It could have just been he was going to give a ticket that night and we were the lucky suckers that got it. Either way, we were lucky to not have an out of service over that one. So make sure you send your drivers with both a paper copy and an electronic backup. They got to save it somewhere, save it on their phone, save it in their email. Make sure you can pull it up and show, hey, I own this vehicle and I have done all of these things. I'm sorry the wind got me today, or whatever the crazy story is today. We all have those insane stories. End of the day, the DOT doesn't care how busy you are or how hard the wind was blowing. They want to see what's documented. They want to see those papers. Part of why I'm doing this video series, guys, I'm a real life doctor, and HIPAA compliance was what they hit you over the head with in school. You got to do this, protect patient privacy. This is how you do it. It's difficult. It is absolutely nothing compared to trucking compliance. This stuff is so disorganized and all over the place. It is hard to find. It is hard to put it together, and there didn't seem to be a single resource where I could go in and have a checklist where all of this stuff was laid out for me and I could easily understand it. So I created a PDF. I put it on Gumroad. It's got all of the step-by-step explanations ready to fill forms. The checklist, I like a checklist. A good checklist will save you at the end of the day, especially when you're trying to manage all this different paperwork. I included pro tips we've learned in being the first few years of business. We've learned some stuff the hard way. We've had some crazy stuff happen, so I include those pro tips, things the DOT won't tell you, and you can really only learn some of this stuff by being in business over the years. So I made sure to put some of that in there, save y'all some heartache if I can. And then basically what it is a packet with every piece of paper and form you need to have filled out for every driver that you have, be it yourself or 5 other drivers you've got leased on. I wanted it to be an easy to use and implement packet. I didn't want to have to start from scratch every time I was looking to add another driver to the company. So that's what I've made. It's a Hotshot packet. It's CDL and non-CDL specific. Y'all can go on Gumroad and find it there. If you want the full packet with all these checklists and pro tips, I've put that link in the description and in the comments. And if you're running a Hotshot authority, remember this is not paperwork you want to guess on. One little pro tip I'll give you, one little bonus here, always check your insurance first before you bother going through the paperwork with these people. Before you spend hours filling the paperwork out, getting all this private information that you've legally got to protect for the next basically decade, always have your insurance agent quote that driver first. We once had a lease-on driver who he seemed like a nice dude, capable, but we got the quote back from the insurance and it was triple what I'm typically looking at for a non-CDL driver because he had so many undisclosed violations on his MVR, and the insurance agent pulled it and was like, I wouldn't do it. There's no physical way that he could make the amount of money to make that particular insurance quote make sense. So he unfortunately had to go on to a different industry based on his driving record. Because remember, this is a safety-oriented industry. If you have a bunch of violations, it's going to cost you to try to get into this. And it may not make sense, like for that guy. He could not have run enough loads to make that insurance quote make sense. At the end of the day, getting the quote first saved us a lot of time, money, and a ton of wasted paperwork. And now I don't have to keep his information on file for the next decade and a half. Alright guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. In the next video, I'm breaking down the vehicle maintenance file, an area most carriers don't even know they have to have. This is the Hotshot Doc, y'all. Signing off until next time. Roll Tide and roll on!